One of the things that people get really mixed up about is when is data synthetic or when is it augmented? Unless we are very clear in this middle group of what our definitions are, we're fooling ourselves and we're fooling our clients potentially, and we probably aren't doing a very good job. And in the end group, you really do need people who understand these issues to be able to challenge what's being bought. I think there needs to be a verification system that helps people understand what is verified and what isn't. I really think that is fundamental. But we really need to divide this into general users, so the general public, intermediate users, so the people using AI in order to sell a product or service, and the end user, the buyer. They all require a different approach. We are working with colleagues around the world, particularly in the US and Europe, finding ways to create a data pledge so that there is some form of identification of verified data or data that reaches a certain standard. Again, you've got that problem that there is no incentive at the moment to upgrade the data that goes in, but we don't have the buyers and users with enough knowledge to challenge what is happening. I think, for example, for the general user, in the data and privacy space, GDPR has done a reasonably good job of letting them go forward with some degree of confidence. And I still think GDPR applies a lot to how we design AI. People think it needs to be a new set of principles, but I think if you look at the way GDPR works and its requirement for respect and designing in privacy, I think designing in transparency, designing in verification will help.
Hey Jane, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You run MRS in the UK, and you wrote three amazing papers. Your team wrote three amazing papers about AI, and they've been written last year. So since then, a lot have been changed and has developed, but maybe you could give us a summary on these papers, because they still are very valid also in today's time.
Yes, I do think, but I'm a cynic, Sebastian, that we like to invent things that look new and wrap them up in new-looking wrapping paper. But actually, when you open the present, it's not much different from what went on before. We do have a small think tank called the Delphi Group, which comprises client-side researchers, academics, large agencies and boutique agencies, and random people we think might be interesting. So that last year they produced 3 reports on AI. The first was on what we call our BEST model for the adoption of AI, then one on synthetic data, and then finally we updated on where we thought the agency world or the research world was. To be fair, our Advanced Insights and Analytics group has produced a paper just recently, which is equally somewhat of an update. So we've got 4 papers out there, but we also have, to fill in the gaps, we've got guidance for how to apply our code of conduct when conducting research with generative AI. So very important this, because most people think that a code of conduct won't apply to the latest technology coming out. But of course, well-written codes of conduct do. And codes of conduct are, in fact, if they're well-written, they are 90% of the law. And so people need to be thinking about that anyway. And there are similarities that go across through our code of conduct, which was just updated last year. For example, we now ask people to be transparent about how they achieve a claim for representativeness in the research that they do. And as you well know, transparency is one of the major problems that we're grappling with in AI. So trying to ensure that when people make claims, they are very clear about what they base those claims on is one way of avoiding the descent into cynicism that we're starting to see. You know, what is it that Gartner says, the trough of disappointment or something, which I think is starting to be apparent amongst buyers. So it is really important we tackle these issues to do with how the data is built, how the model works, and the transparency with which it is put together. And that last one, I think, may be a battle we're trying to fight 10 years from now, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. But how do you see transparency when you look at modern or this new functionality like deep research? You know, when you go to ChatGPT or maybe Perplexity, they do quite a in-depth research on the internet, and they provide all these citations, all these sources in their documents. Is this the right step towards transparency and reducing bias, or would you say there's much more need to be done, and the basically the analysis of the result is something that is not bias-free?
It's an interesting point. I mean, I do think citations are important, but I have a horrible feeling that just leaving it at a long list of citations will be exactly like privacy notices are today. Everyone has to provide them and nobody reads them.
No one reads them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I do think that there has to be a way that we can look at quality marking some of this output in a way that shortcuts that need to read through 93 pages of citations. And we all know, of course, that some of those citations are based on non-existent data or non-existent or made-up input. So catching those is going to be incredibly difficult, and some of those will be very pertinent to the decisions that you're going to make. It frightens the hell out of me that people are throwing a load of data into a black box and then not worrying about what they see coming out the other end. And I think, I fear me, that's where too many people are. And certainly mass use, mass public use is in that space. I do think that budget holders, the clients, are starting to be suspicious. And I've had numerous research directors and others say to me, how do we know what is smoke and mirrors? Because we're suspicious of this. And I think that suspicion is starting to grow, not helped by the way people are overclaiming for what their particular model does. So I think overclaiming is a big factor in this as well and needs to be addressed.
Okay. So, I mean, for me or let's say as a user or someone who wants some research to be done, you still say trusting these research features from Perplexity and ChatGPT is something where we need to be very careful and spend a lot of time validating the sources this research is based from.
Yeah, I mean, it's buyer beware, isn't it? And I am absolutely not saying that I think that people will spend time verifying. I think there needs to be a verification system that helps people understand what is verified and what isn't. And I really think that is fundamental. But we really need to divide this into general users, so the general public, intermediate users, so the people using AI in order to sell a product or service, and the end user, the buyer. They all require a different approach. I think, for example, for the general user in the data and privacy space, GDPR has done a reasonably good job of letting them go forward with some degree of confidence. And I still think GDPR applies a lot to how we design AI. People think it needs to be a new set of principles, but I think if you look at the way GDPR works and its requirement for respect and designing in privacy, I think designing in transparency, designing in verification will help going forwards. But at the moment, what we've got is something that looks very like Google search, and is probably about as differentiated. We've got a lot of services that are based on the LLMs we've been running for ages, because there's nothing new in LLMs in the research sector. We've been running them forever. And then we have the very specific to end user models that they're creating themselves. So the client's own AI models. And it's really important to realise that what's going into ChatGPT and all those other models at the moment is just stuff that has existed for a very long time. It's historic data. Whereas the stuff that clients are developing for themselves in their own model is continuously updated data, which has a competitive benefit, and they're not going to be letting that out into the general public. So essentially, what ChatGPT will have is always looking over its shoulder. It's always historic data, and it will become less useful as the big corporates are ensuring that their data isn't anywhere near it because for IP reasons and competitive reasons. So I do think there will be a disadvantaged group who are dealing with the openly available models. But having said that, they have a lot of benefits. So it's not as if everyone is being sort of left behind and poor and in a world apart from everyone else. But it's just, you've just got to be cynical if you're a general user. If you are a user who is using to intermediate, so you're developing a system based on your own existing LLMs, then of course you need to be very clear of what you're doing and what you're not doing. One of the things that people get really mixed up about is when is data synthetic or when is it augmented? People frequently using synthetic data as a label for synthetic respondents. And unless we are very clear in this middle group of what our definitions are, we're fooling ourselves and we're fooling our clients potentially, and we probably aren't doing a very good job. And in the end group, you really do need people who understand these issues to be able to challenge what's being bought. And that's not generally procurement departments. So if you think about it, you've got another problem, which is your procurement department trained in how to spot Emperor's New Clothes or things that aren't appropriate to what your procurement brief is requiring? Procurement departments can be pretty bad at buying agency or creative stuff anyway, and we're adding another layer of information requirement to them. But I can't see anyone who's training their procurement departments to be able to be intelligent buyers.
Yeah, makes sense. In your view, how would an ideal world look like? I mean, of course, there are a lot of challenges. When we look at different jurisdictions, we have the US, where there's almost no regulations, kind of wild west in terms of AI, run by a few big companies. And then you have Europe and the UK, where we have more regulations, where unfortunately we don't produce our own models yet. We don't have our own industry. How do you see this unfolding in the near future? I mean, how could a world look like? It can't be that the models are only developed in the US with no regulations, and we only regulate, but we don't build. We only become consumers. So, how can we solve this problem?
I'm not sure there's one clean answer, or I think somebody might have grown rich solving it already. But I do think that it is important for people in the UK to know, or users in the UK to know, that we need to apply EU regulations to what we are doing because of the number of EU respondents in the UK and the amount of in this country, about 50% of EU research comes through the UK. So we have an interest in making sure we've got equivalence on all these rules. in an ideal world, and I am talking an ideal world, what you're doing is verifying the data that goes into the model, and you've got a verification process for the other end. If you're not going to open up the black box, then there has to be something that people sign up to that says, I'm prepared to stand by this, and you can sue me, take me to court or not, if not. So I think that what you've got to look for is how the data is verified going in and what is happening coming out, and whether there is a challenge function available to you. We already are talking about problems here because so very little data is properly verified.
Yeah.
And we are working with colleagues around the world, particularly in the US and Europe, on finding ways to create a data pledge so that there is some form of identification of verified data or data that reaches a certain standard. Because the poor old AI, bless it, I mean, it's really worrying that people are starting to anthropomorphize these things, but it doesn't know that it's taking rubbish in.
Yeah, of course.
And unfortunately, most of that historic data is pretty rubbish in some ways.
Yeah, it's everything which is on the internet and
everything that isn't, which obviously is all that representative data you need for minority audiences or for exceptional use cases or for any of this. So again, you've got that problem that there is no incentive at the moment to upgrade the data that goes in, but we don't have the buyers and users with enough knowledge to challenge what is happening. But so it needs to happen both ends. And in classic style, we need those buyers really to be demanding that data quality standard before we're going to get any change, because otherwise the supply chain economics mean there's no incentive.
Yeah, when I look at the general usage of AI in society and the general understanding of these services, these models, which I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. And then asking that the people who don't use it yet really understand that there's bias behind is quite a challenge. It's quite a big gap which needs to be closed or at least shrunken.
And I do think that's where either regulation or pledge type activity comes in, so that we're not, I mean, again, as I say to you, you have to divorce the general public doing general use and the professionals doing professional use. So for the general public doing general use, they're not going to work hard at verifying. Obviously, they don't bother to read privacy data, so they're not going to bother with anything like this. So I do think some form of at least tick or pledge mark would be helpful so that they can go, yes, I've seen that, that's fine. For buyers who are commercial buyers, then so much more rests for them on the decisions they make based on this this technology. So they have to demand that their supply chain is properly verified. And I compare this to if you were Marks and Spencer's selling a teddy bear to a child in the high street. You would know where every element of that teddy bear came from. You should, of course, have verified that it's not being produced by child labour, that it's not flammable. So actually, I think that what we're missing here, and I really don't know why people aren't more angry about it, is the same sort of quality supply chain that would apply to anything else that you buy in the high street or house building even or wherever.
The thing which is worrying me, or which I think is in contradiction to this supply chain, is the fact that when you speak to these companies like OpenAI and so, not even they know why the model made a certain decision. Yeah, so I think we're already at the stage where even for them it's a black box. And how would we as the general public or regulators get behind these processes and models. I mean, I just, for me, it's something like which is hardly solvable.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm a bit dark mirror on this one, I'm hoping to God I'm not alive by the time it really gets to be a problem, because I really don't know that there is a proper answer. I do think that most of what we're talking about is mitigation. It's not a proper solution. And I do think that if you're able to publicise the stuff that goes wrong and that looks silly, people do think twice. So you need to be able to shame, show and tell and what have you. And at the moment, you can't do much of that. But if we can't do that, then I think these developers, wherever they're sitting, are running away with our lives, and we've lost control over them, frankly.
Yeah. How would... when you look at the research process, how do you see this? How is a researcher working in now or in a year's time? How would they? What tools or what methodologies do they use to make sure that the result is trustworthy and not biased? And I could imagine being not a professional researcher. That this is quite a challenge, and how they're operating.
Well, at the moment, a lot of the AI that's in the system is really in the operations end of the system rather than the analysis and results end of the system. So it's in creating questionnaires, fast creating of concepts, almost like a sieve before you get to the real piece of research. You throw a lot of stuff in and some comes out, and you can do that much faster. So it's in a processing element, really, rather than anything else at the moment.
Analysis.
And I think it'll be a while before it supplants the real analysis and reporting. It will report right. That's different from doing the reporting, if you see what I mean. So you can do your presentations with it, and it does great presentations. You can you can produce the large data maps with it, and it does that brilliantly. But it still needs, and most people are still applying the human to that. I have a worry that one of the checks and balances that provides will disappear, because trainees, graduates who are joining the sector are not now being trained on data handling in the same way as they used to be. And I talked to a colleague at Verizon in the US about this, and she shares my worries in that however dull, let's say, an Excel spreadsheet was, in handling it, in inputting data and in checking what was coming out, you were training your brain subconsciously, at least, on what looks good and what looks bad. That isn't going to happen anymore.
We don't do this anymore, no.
And so I really worry that the stuff that's being ladled out and into this black box, nobody has any sense or knows how that checking has to be done. And I don't have an answer for that. And I know the big corporates don't have an answer for that. But it is one of my long list of worries to have about AI and how it's used.
And probably not only that, it's probably also the willingness to invest. Because when I get 25 pages research result from deep research for nothing, why would I pay 10, 15,000 grand for proper research? I mean, these it's probably also something companies, they really struggle with. How do they justify the investment for proper research instead of relying on what is coming out of this black box?
Well, I mean, you're right. I have some reassurance in the fact that these days, or up to now, they could have done a lot of their work with Google and delivered the Google results as good original research. And a lot of people did. A lot of people who should know better did. Not in my sector, mostly in creative development or anything else like that. However, the sort of data that you're using for these models, as we were talking about, is historic data. People change. So unless you update your data, it's actually becoming out of date very, very rapidly. And in order to update your data, you have to have good primary research. You know, it isn't lifted out of the ether and dumped anywhere. You have to create the proper primary research, especially for harder to reach audiences. So I do think there will be a level where people are saying, well, we know what we have to pay for stuff we're going to make a multi-million-dollar decision on. But there's people who say, well, that's all right, I'm just developing an ad and it can look like anything as long as I put AI at the end of it. I think they've always done something like that with Google, and they will go on doing something like that.
You mentioned minorities, and I think that's also an important topic because, the models they're not trained on minority data. I guess most of them not. And I've been in New Zealand a couple of months last year, and I was talking to someone from the university in Auckland, and they running projects to really focus on minority data, in this case, from the local population, and really focusing on building systems so that these data is preserved and also used for this kind of decisions. So what measures do you recommend, or what is put in place in the industry to make sure that minority data is handled properly?
It's a very good question, and I think in general, it's not good enough is the way things are happening. We have a group called Representation in Research, and they've been working on resources to help people be better at this, but equally to help people understand that there is a financial benefit in doing this right. So they ran some sample research and indicated quite large samples of people that have been missed out of competitive strategic analysis. And it's back to my point that if you find money in it, you're going to do it, aren't you? But so we've got that sort of work to show to people. It's all available on the website. And I think we're just going to have to do a lot more of that. But I laugh rather hollowly at a lot of this because we talk about minority underrepresented groups in research. It is only very recently that women got properly represented. So a darn lot of that data is going to be wrong for 51% of the population, let alone the ethnic minority or any other minority. And we're only just getting to grips with how we research with people with certain physical disabilities, how we research with people with neurodiversity conditions. We're not good enough at that yet. So again, the data, any existing data is going to be pretty poor on any of those groupings. And a lot of those groupings, if you think about people with physical ability requirements, that's a growing segment because that's all people getting old. But we're still not thinking about that. Equally, we're not necessarily segmenting our older population base properly. So I can't tell you the number of times people have said, right, it's 55 plus as an age group. But you wouldn't say sort of that's 20 to... It's just not working. No. There are a lot of basic problems that need to be dealt with, but what we do with it is putting up the resources and actually having strategic interest groups who advise. So we do have a group, for example, called MRS Unlimited, which is run by people with neurodiverse conditions and physical disabilities who are advising on the best way to do some of this stuff. But it is through the goodwill of their own hearts rather than through and through a mission to improve rather than any commercial model, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, we talk about the German Mittelstand, in Germany, but I mean, Mittelstand is such a big amount of companies. Same as 55 plus, I mean, this is...
Well, you can see this wherever, and it's illustrative of the problem that you get with any large data handling system that isn't properly nuanced. Revenue and customs in the UK used to differentiate people into just good and bad.
Okay.
So it meant that the cost of handling the bad is obviously extremely high. But if you actually did the research on that bad group, you found that there was about 12 million people who were actually just couldn't cope. So they weren't trying to be bad. So if you change the way you deal with them, you cut 60 million cost here, 70. So there's a real value in doing this. It's just that rarely do people, and particularly when they're putting in huge software model costs, huge other hardware models and costs, it's not in their interest to do something differently. No. And there's your other risk with AI. It's built, it's costly, and as you say, people don't really understand what's going into it and what's coming out of it. But pretty damn soon, it will be the only thing in town. And if it ain't good enough, we're really going to suffer for that.
Yes. But we don't want to be too...
Am I depressing you yet?
We don't want to be too depressing. It's it is here such a beautiful sunny day.
Yeah, it's still sunny out here. I'll think of something nice to say.
Look at MRS and your. I mean, what you said you wrote a Ford report, which is coming out soon. You said.
Well, we've got 3 sets of things. We've got the existing reports, about 4 of them. Yeah. There will be another one coming out soon. We've got guidance on how to use AI in general research, and that which was issued last year is being updated this year. And we're also working with the EU regulators in how to develop a system of regulation for research that is usable, but also protective. So, it has to do that balance. And then when that comes out, we'll be updating our code. So basically, this is causing us a huge amount of work because every time something new comes out, we have to sort of address it. But we are one of the few regulators around in this space. So we're always getting asked to contribute on these elements.
Yeah, I can imagine you have a lot to do because the pace of development is quite fast. But talking about regulation, I mean, we know the European AI Act is established. It's being rolled out. How does the UK position themselves as a country? I mean, do you apply the same regulation rules, or do you develop your own?
Well, I think you're right. You stated it earlier. The UK is trying to sort of bridge the gap between the US and EU. But practically speaking, we would say to people that you would need to be applying the EU regulations because we can't disaggregate EU citizens and UK citizens as much as people would want to do. So we generally say let's be applying the EU regulations rather than the US regulations.
Which doesn't exist. Which sort of exists, yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. Interesting. And maybe coming back to research. I mean, maybe some practical guidance for a hobby researcher like me. How should people? I have a topic which I would like to get into, and how should I approach that nowadays?
Blimey, if I could answer that, then I'd be a rich person, don't you think? I always say that it doesn't matter if you're an individual researching for yourself or a corporate researching for somebody else. The first issue is defining properly the question you want to ask. And where things go radically wrong are when you put in a very vague question and you've actually essentially left the machine to do what it wants.
Sure.
So the more you can specify the parameters of what you're asking, the better you know this. I know you do because you're just asking me the question to be polite. But you'd be surprised how many briefs I see that are so general, they're not going to give a usable answer. So first principle is that. The second principle, if it looks odd, it probably is. Again, I'm not very happy about the level of the British public or any public to be wary of scams that selling them great things. Well, that wariness has to develop because it has to develop for what comes out of AI, whatever they be called, ChatGPT or whatever it is. So those two principles are about as much as I would hope anyone would remember, because a lot of people aren't even remembering those. So start with that, and you'll soon get bored with the answers if you put in something really vague and woolly at the first instance. I
think learning how to ask proper questions is always an important thing, which we not many people follow anymore. No, that's right. You do get briefs into agencies which basically say, what do we want to know? Everything. Who do we want to know it from? Everybody. To make lots of money. Hey, it's very, very interesting and, eye-opening discussion, I would say. I would love to maybe speak again in 5-6 months and see how things have developed in terms of models, but also regulations, see how the EU Act has developed and rolled out in the different countries, and how the UK is positioning themselves. Would be very interesting. Well, it's been great talking to you. I hope I haven't depressed you too much. It's sort of my job to be depressing as a regulator. No. I love to have her both. I just had an interview this morning with someone from New Zealand who's running an AI advisory, and I love to see both sides of the story. And the truth is, I mean, to take elements from every perspective and form your own opinion. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Well, essentially, all we want to do is ensure we're not shutting stable doors. Exactly. After that, anyone can do what they want, but don't leave those stable doors open. Thank you very much, Sebastian. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks a lot, Shane. Bye-bye.